Okay, so get this. We're diving into humpback whales today. We've got this fisheries report with like a ton of information. And we also have these two news stories that are like straight out of a movie. People getting swallowed by whales
Yeah.
and surviving.
I know. It's wild, isn't it?
It's crazy.
It's amazing what these stories tell us about whale behavior. And they really emphasize, I think, why it's so important to understand these creatures.
Totally. Okay, so let's unpack all this. This NOAA report paints a pretty amazing picture of humpback whales. So what really stood out to you when you're reading this?
Well, first off, these guys are like globetrotters. They live in all the world's oceans, and they migrate thousands of miles each year. And get this, they can grow up to 60 feet long and weigh up to 40 tons.
40 tons. That's like heavier than a semi-truck.
Exactly. And their name humpback is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, you see them. But, their scientific name, Megaptera, that means big-winged. They have these enormous pectoral fins, which are crucial for, like, all their incredible acrobatics, like breaching.
So I'm picturing those huge fins helping them launch out of the water
Yeah.
That's incredible. So what about their feeding habits? The report mentioned this thing called a bubble net technique.
Oh, yeah.
What is that?
So humpbacks mainly feed on krill, those are those tiny little crustaceans,
Oh,
and small fish, and they create these really intricate bubble nets. By swimming in circles and releasing air, it's like they're trapping their prey in a curtain of bubbles before lunging upwards with their mouths wide open.
and that, my friend, is how you accidentally end up inside a whale. Speaking of which, these news stories are wild. A lobster diver in Cape Cod gets swallowed while diving. Thinks it's a shark at first.
Can you imagine that? No teeth, just the sudden realization that you're in a whale's mouth. He said he spent about 30 seconds in there before being spat out completely unharmed.
30 seconds, I would probably have a heart attack. And then there's the kayaker in Chile, swallowed whole with his kayak.
Yeah, his dad was filming the whole thing. It's terrifying and amazing at the same time. You see this massive whale, and then it suddenly engulfs the kayak.
Okay, so these stories are unbelievable, but they make you think, like, how often does this actually happen? Should we be worried about getting swallowed while swimming in the ocean?
Well, the report suggests that both of these incidents happen during feeding. Humpbacks lunge with their mouths open to catch prey, so if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. But remember, attacks on humans are incredibly rare. Humpbacks don't usually see us as prey.
So more of a wrong place, wrong time situation than a deliberate attack.
Exactly, but it does underline the importance of respecting their space and following safe viewing guidelines.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we've established that humpback whales are massive. They have a very unique feeding technique, and they occasionally follow humans by accident. What else did we learn from this report?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Remember those whaling bans that were put in place? The report highlights how those bans were absolutely crucial in bringing humpback whales back from the brink of extinction. They were nearly wiped out by commercial whaling.
Yeah, that's a conservation success story, isn't it? So how did they manage to recover?
Well, the bans were just the first step. They stopped the hunting. But then came the real challenge of helping the remaining populations rebuild. This involved protecting their breeding and feeding grounds, creating marine sanctuaries, and monitoring their numbers very closely. It was a long process. But it shows what's possible when we take action.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing to see what can happen when people come together to protect these incredible creatures.
It really is inspiring. It's not just about their numbers. Humpback whales, they play a vital role in the whole marine ecosystem.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in their size and like those crazy stories, but there's so much more than just majestic creatures, right?
Absolutely. Think of them as regulators. They help control populations of krill and small fish, which has like a ripple effect throughout the entire food web. Their feeding patterns also influence how nutrients are distributed, impacting the overall health of the ocean.
So they're like giant ecosystem engineers, and the report mentioned their migrations. Did it say that humpback whales have one of the longest migrations of any mammal?
That's right. Some populations, they travel up to 5,000 miles between their feeding and breeding grounds. It's mind-boggling when you consider like the energy and navigation skills required for such a journey.
That puts those accidental encounters into perspective, doesn't it? And speaking of amazing feats, what about those incredible songs?
Ah, yes, their songs. They're complex, haunting melodies that can last for hours. Researchers believe that these songs are mainly used for communication. During mating season, male humpbacks sing to attract females and compete with rivals.
It's like an underwater opera, and the report mentioned that these songs, they actually evolved over time.
Exactly. Scientists have observed changes in song patterns and structures, suggesting a dynamic and ever-changing form of communication. It's like they have their own underwater culture, complete with evolving traditions.
It makes you wonder what else we might discover about these creatures.
There's still so much we don't know, but unfortunately the report also highlights, the very real threats they face. from human activities.
Right. We talked about entanglement in fishing gear earlier.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. Humpbacks can get tangled in nets, ropes, other gear, restricting their movement and ability to feed. This can lead to injuries, starvation, or even death.
And then there are vessel strikes. With the increasing shipping traffic, that's becoming a major concern too, right?
Absolutely. Collisions with ships can be devastating, causing serious injuries or fatalities. It's a reminder that we share the ocean with these animals, and we need to be more mindful of our impact.
And let's not forget about noise pollution. How does that affect humpback whales?
Noise from ships' sonar and oil and gas exploration can disrupt their communication, navigation, and feeding behaviors. Imagine trying to find food or a mate while constantly being bombarded with loud, confusing noises.
It's like trying to have a conversation at a rock concert. So we've got these physical threats like entanglement and ship strikes, and then these more insidious threats like noise pollution. It paints a rather sobering picture.
It does, and we can't ignore the impact of climate change either. Rising ocean temperatures and shifting currents can affect their prey distribution and migration patterns, adding yet another layer of complexity to the challenges they face.
It's a stark reminder that the health of our oceans is intimately connected to the well-being of these creatures and ultimately to our own survival as well.
Exactly. We need to remember that.
So we've learned so much about these incredible creatures, their biology, their behavior, the threats they face. But I keep coming back to those stories about, people getting swallowed by whales. It's terrifying, but also kind of miraculous that they survived. Like, what can we learn from those encounters?
Well, those stories really highlight the power and unpredictability of nature. I think it's easy to forget that even though we've made great strides in understanding the ocean, there's still so much we don't know. And that brings our deep dive into the world of humpback whales to a close.